Hey everyone, this is Mace1370. Today we are going to go over RTA tips and tricks to push high championed in Legend. Before we get into it though, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Also, please check the video description below for a link to my Discord. So this will be mostly a talking video. I will, pull up some specific units and stuff like that, but it's mostly going to be kind of the mental approach and strategy that you'll use as you push during the season to do your very best in real-time arena or world arena. So I think the first category or the first tip that I'm going to talk about is the mental aspect of the game. I've seen a lot of people tilt when they play. They lose a couple in the row, they get really frustrated. I'm sure everyone has seen a streamer, lose a couple games in a row, get super frustrated while they're playing, complain about RNG, and then you look at their next few games and they're just totally playing worse than they were before. So that's kind of the short-term mental strategy that you need to build, which is kind of resilience to losing. And I think that you get that with time and also with the right attitude and perspective on the game. This game has a ton of RNG. This hero right here, Clury, she has more than a 15% chance to just lose the game if she doesn't land her provoke much of the time, or her death break. So because that 15% exists, there is just some number of games that you're going to lose no matter what you do. You could have drafted perfectly, you could have better gear than the opponent, and none of your stuff lands and all of their stuff lands, and once things go that way, it is a very low likelihood that you'll win. So don't look at it as a bad thing to lose in those scenarios. I look at every single game I lose, and rather than being disappointed and not winning, I look at it and I try to frame it as, here's an opportunity to learn something. Like, what did I do wrong? Because I've almost always made a mistake somewhere along the way, either in drafting or during my decisions, and I try to use that as an opportunity to figure out what I could do better next time. Just as an example here, I lost a few games when I was playing earlier. I wasn't really doing the best draft against this guy. I think I ran into him twice, and he basically beat me both times with Arcdemon Mercedes. I kind of played into it. I could have, especially the second time when I knew he was going to do it, I could have either tried to take the flurry away from him. I also could have maybe switched my draft up a bit, either using a more resilient cleanser or picking heroes that, were not susceptible to Arcdemon Mercedes, like FCC and General Purchase, for example. So there's always an opportunity to analyze, a draft or a game and figure out what you did wrong, and try to look at losses as an opportunity to do that rather than getting discouraged that, you didn't win points. So that's kind of the short-term mental goal. The long-term mental goal that I think you need to focus on in order to push an RTA and to do better is to have an attitude where you're never going to give up. And it's kind of cheesy, but I think Steve Jobs had a quote. He said, "I'm convinced that half of what separates the successful entrepreneurs from the non-successful ones is pure perseverance." So if you push for a season and you don't make champion or you don't make legend, don't let that define you and then just quit and stop trying. Because it doesn't really matter if you didn't make it that season, because there's always going to be another one and you're always going to have another opportunity. And that's true in life, it's true in this game. The more attempts you have on something, the more shots on goal, the more opportunities you're going to have to succeed. And in terms of, pushing high and getting a nice frame, you just have to do it one time, right? And then you have it. Obviously, it's nice to do well every single time, but never giving up, I think, is really important. When I played in RTA during Season 1, I think I got hard stuck around Champ 250. Just felt like I couldn't get higher. I played a bunch of games. When I played in Season 2, I almost made Legend. I was Legend for most of the season, and then on the final day, I was in Legend a few times and then fell out. And then in the last couple hours, I couldn't really break. It was between Champ, it was basically 20, spots away from Legend. I was just kind of stuck there. And then this season I made it, and it wasn't easy, but it felt like I progressed, between seasons. So that's kind of your long-term attitude or philosophy, is just don't give up, just keep trying. I've seen it outside of this game in more ways than one. People that keep trying, even if they don't fail or even if they don't succeed the first time, you keep pushing and eventually you'll get there. In regards to the mental thing, things you can specifically do to help your mental game, if you're the type of player that tilts a lot, or the type of player that wants to give up, if you don't get the goal that you were shooting for the first time, is I would really recommend getting a support network. So that could be a guild, that is also involved in RTA. It could be a Discord. I'll give a little plug to my Discord. I think we're a great support network. But there are other ones. There's a ton out there. A bunch of streamers have really good Discords. and there are people there that are, into the game also, and that they will are more than happy to help you, in terms of your progression and what to do. So that was kind of tip number one, is shoring up the mental aspect, and I think it's probably one of the most important, because if you don't approach a goal with the right mental attitude, then I think you're going to doom yourself to fail. You're going to set yourself up to get tilted, get really upset, give up, when you're having a tough time. So kind of setting that up ahead of time, I think, will serve you really well. So the second thing, and this is probably more like a game mechanic or a specific thing to this game rather than just, kind of like a general philosophy, is the importance of your hero roster, and understanding that the deeper your roster is, the better you're going to do, and that if you don't have a super deep roster, that might be limiting you from progressing. So we've kind of seen over the last, I guess, several months, more and more super strong counter units have been released by Smilegate. Holiday Euphine is maybe not the best example, although she's the first hero that gets pulled up. But I think one of the first heroes that kind of came along that was almost certainly like a strong counter pick was Blood Moon Haste. He came out and everyone's like, oh man, that is an RB counter. If you have RB and they draft Blood Moon Haste, like Blood Moon Haste becomes kind of a must ban. And at the time, it didn't feel like there were a ton of units like that in the game, but since then, it feels like there's more and more of those types of units where they become must bans, but they're only must bans if your opponent has another unit on their side. And so the more of these types of units you have, the stronger you will be able to respond to your opponent, because you can structure your draft in a certain way where you pick a few flexible things that don't have a strong counter, and then you end the draft with a couple strong units that are must bans, and it really forces the opponent, to give you the units that you want in your draft. So having Blood Moon Haste, he's a big one. TM Lilica is even a really strong counter pick in certain scenarios. Archdemon Shadow is one of those units. Briarwitch Assaria is definitely one of those units. So these are the types of things that if you don't have them, it's going to negatively impact you. So in regards to that, you need to look at your overall goal, like how far do you want to push, and then that will determine how many of these types of units you need. So I would say if you're just shooting for champion, then you don't need all of them. You probably only need a few. If you're shooting for legend though, I would strongly encourage you to never ever skip a new ML hero. And I don't even think it's necessarily wrong to even just mulligan them. The buff philosophy that Smilegate has shown is that, these are premium units, and even if they're not amazing when they first come out, they're almost certainly going to get buffed at some point. The buff may not always be super significant, looking at this guy right here, but, he's even in a better spot than he was, and I feel like he's kind of a viable pick now in some scenarios, and I think we're going to see when the next season starts, people are going to be picking DJB to some degree, and I think he'll be fine. He's not quite at the level where I think I would like him to be, but he's definitely better. And he's probably the weakest example of that. But, Briarwitch Assaria is a unit that just became like a complete powerhouse at the end of this last season. But when she came out, everyone regarded her as complete trash. I mean, it was mostly Guiding Light, I think, is what made her viable. Because, she can hide from Flurry and stuff like that. That was kind of her problem before. But so this was a unit that I pulled when she first came out, way back then, because I knew that I was going to be going for Legend, and I was like, I never want to be in a situation again. I call it the ML Tywin situation. He's a unit that was not powerful when he first came out, and then he got buffed into ridiculousness, and here we are. So in regards to ML5 specifically, if you're shooting for Legend, I would strongly encourage you to pull every single one, pretty much. Try to get them all. It's kind of like Pokemon. RGBs, though, are a bit different. We've seen Smilegate's buff philosophy that they kind of apply a similar reasoning to limited RGBs as they do to ML5s, and that if they're not good, they're going to probably buff them. So I don't think it's at all a waste of resources to pull every single limited unit, even if they don't look great. Landy was kind of mediocre when she first came out, and then Guiding Light buffs happened and they increased her damage for some reason, and now she's totally absurd, right? Elfelt's getting a buff. Hard to say how powerful she'll be. These types of things can take a while to test and find out for sure. But you're not, I think, going to go wrong by pulling all of the limited units and their artifacts, at least one copy. The rest of the RGB5s are kind of a completely different story, and if you're trying to, use your resources wisely, I think you can skip many of them. There are a couple RGBs right here, Rhea and Destina, Rowana, so there are ones that you draft and you use pretty regularly, but there are so many RGB heroes that, RGB5 heroes that are just not super relevant. Like Ida's a new one. I don't know, there's a bunch. They're probably all in my waiting room. So again, if you're like an Omega Whale and you're just going to pull everything, obviously get everything, but you can skip a lot of the RGB5s and still succeed. So if you find yourself investing a lot of resources to get those, and then they just sit on the bench and they don't do anything, maybe reevaluate, like, how much do I actually need these to succeed? Because oftentimes their kits are just kind of limited and not always super PvP centric. So that was, just kind of going over the roster. I think it was more important this season than ever before, as I mentioned, because of all those strong counterpick units. And going forward, I think it's still going to be that way. So just keep in mind that you're going to have to keep up with those ML5 releases if you want to push, for high legend, or high champion or legend. So the next kind of overall tip is related to gear, and that's using your resources properly. And this applies to whether you're free to play or whether you're a big spender. I think if you use your resources wisely, then you're going to excel beyond where you would if you didn't. Seems kind of like an obvious statement, but maybe some people are kind of squandering their resources a bit, and if you kind of focus and recalibrate how you should be using them, I think that can help you. So mainly, I think you should be using your Sky Stones to farm, and we kind of mentioned before about skipping non-limited RGBs or being able to skip many of them. Don't feel like you have to use all of your Sky Stones, to summon. Use them to farm, and the vast majority of your farming should be in Wyvern. Wyvern 13 here. You can totally ignore Golem. You can totally ignore Katie's for now. I don't know if they're going to buff that or change it or what. Azimanic is, I think, a good hunt to run occasionally. You do want some amount of immunity gear, and it's really necessary to succeed at a very high level. So you will have to run it, but I would say for every 20 runs of Wyvern, every let me rephrase that. Every 10 sets of 21 runs of Wyvern, so that's like 200 runs, you should be doing like a 20 run of Azimanic, like a 1 to 10 or a 1 to 11 ratio. I think is plenty. You can get away with not putting immunity on some units, but you really want to have that high quality Wyvern gear. So use your Sky Stones to farm, focus on Wyvern, ignore Golem, ignore Katie's, do some Azimanic. The way I do it is I farm Wyvern during the day, and then before I go to bed I just do a 20 run of Azimanic hunt. So that's how I get my immunity gear, that and gear packs. And between those things you get plenty of it. So Banshee is a bit of a contentious topic. Some people are really big Banshee farmers and they think it's amazing. I think it's okay. I think you can gear some units really well on Banshee gear optimally, like Ravi is one that comes to mind. But that's not many units really want counter gear. It's a pretty select few, and kind of the same goes for lifesteal. Like, I think Tempest Surin is probably the only hero that you like really want to have on lifesteal gear. Rylet is nice on lifesteal gear, but he's kind of a meme these days anyways. And that's kind of it when it comes to Banshee. Getting resist gear is nice and everything for your healers, but not necessary. You can put them on immunity, you can put them on any other like random stuff you get from other things. So I think Banshee is okay. I would only farm Banshee if you're shooting for high legend or champion. If you're not shooting for either of those, Banshee is by no means necessary, so you can just ignore it. I would only say if you're shooting for legend is Banshee worth doing, and I would do it to gear up like a counter Ravi, a lifesteal Tempest Surin, and then get some nice resist gear along the way, and then you're probably Gucci. So that's in terms of how to use your resources. Once you have spent them correctly and you get gear, I think that it is really important to look at your gear and figure out what heroes, or not what heroes, but what play styles does your gear allow you to play. So I'm an example of somebody who plays a lot of standard, or bruisers, and I do that not because I think it's the most fun, but because that's how my gear rolled. Cleaving can be a lot of fun, really aggressive play styles can be a lot of fun, but I feel like I don't have the DPS gear to get a super super good offensive, really aggressive team. So for example, like my RB is good. Obviously, like he has like gear that like rolled well. But if you look at people that cleave and people that are really aggressive, their RB just has like more damage and a little more speed than mine does. But this is pretty much the best I can do. But I can gear a really nice FCC, and she works really well for me. So figure out, how your gear rolls, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and craft your strategy in terms of your playstyle around that. Don't say like, I am a cleaver, so I'm going to cleave regardless of if you have cleave gear or not. If you do that, I think you're going to fail. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have fun in the game, obviously. I'm just saying like this is what you want to do if you want to succeed. So if you want to have fun, like play whatever you want. Obviously, like no one's going to, judge or anything. Go for it. But if you want to do the best that you can in terms of pushing your rank, I think look at your gear and figure out the types of units that you're able to make. Something that can help you with that is the gear optimizer. I can show you mine here. So this was made by Fribbles. A big shout out to him. This really helps you once you have more than a few hundred pieces of gear. It gets really overwhelming really fast to figure out how to gear everything. And this tool is going to help you figure out what types of playstyles your gear will support, because once you get it all loaded up in here, you can load your heroes, give them the correct bonus stats that they're going to have in terms of their artifact and stuff like that. And then you're going to set your priority in terms of what is the hero you want to have your best possible gear on. So for example, let's say I wanted to do an aggressive playstyle. I want to draft really fast Bassars, really strong RBs. I want to take speed contesters. I want to run people over with speed and damage. So one of the units, if you want that strategy, is RB. So you would take all gear off everybody in here. You'd load all your heroes in, but take all the gear off. You would go to Arbiter Vildred, who's under A, obviously. There he is. And you would put in your desired stats, and you would, say basically use all the gear that I possibly have. I want the best possible gear on RB. You would find that set, whatever it is, equip it to him, and then lock it and say, okay, he's done. Now I'm going to go to my next priority unit, and you go down the line. And you take a look, and once you've done that, for example, for an aggressive lineup, you look at the stats and how that works out. And you can talk to other people. This is where a support network is very helpful, and say, hey, this is what I can put on RB, this is what I can put on my speed units, like Operator Sigrid, this is how much damage I can get on Watcher Shuri, 200 speed. Is this enough to build really aggressive drafts? And, they can answer yes or no to that. If it's no, then you can do the same thing, but instead you do bruisers, and that's what I ended up doing. And so one of the cornerstone units for me this past season was Ambitious Tywin. So instead of RB, I built him first. I said, here's a unit that I'm going to be picking almost all the time. I want to have good tank stats on him, but I also want to have good crit rate, and crit damage as well as at least 200 speed. And given the gear that I had back then when I started the grind in the last month or so, this is the best I could do. So I put it on him, and then I'm like, okay, that one's done. Now I go to the next hero. So for me, that was FCC. I put good tank gear on her, and down the line. So figuring out which playstyle you can support. Once you identify that, then you identify what heroes you want to put your best gear on. And again, this is a good support network. You can come in and you can talk to people and figure out who those are. Put your best gear on them, and then you go down the line. So as an example here, my Viseria has workable gear, but this is by no means my best DPS gear. That's on other heroes, but this is good enough for her. I've seen Viserias with way better stats, but for my purposes, this was fine. I basically just sped tune her to around this speed, and then as much damage as I could put on with my leftover gear. And I knew I didn't need to give her my best gear because that was already on other heroes. So that's kind of it when it comes to gear. I guess the last little minor point I'll talk about is speed tuning. This is something that I didn't really pay as much attention to in the first and second season of RTA as I think I should have, and it was incredibly important this season. Maybe that was just because of the heroes people were drafting, but it felt very important this season. So for me, I identified how I typically drafted units. When I would pick RB, I oftentimes had Briarwitch Asaria in my draft, and so I knew for those two to work together, Briarwitch had to be a little bit faster because I wanted her to strip away immunity so that RB could blind people. So I put her at 250, and then I put RB at 240, for example. Something else I tried running Arby a lot slower so that I could have General Purgus go faster than him to give him attack buff, but I had him on basket anyways, and it didn't really feel worth, having that like loss of first turn with Arby, so I sped him back up again. Another example of speed tuning, I guess General Purgus is probably one of the better examples of that. So where is General Purgus? So I put GP here around 220. If you wanted to go hyper aggressive, you could put him at 250 or 260 and build your DPS around 250. That wasn't my playstyle. Most of my DPS are around 200 speed, so I built him at about 220 so that he would always take a turn before them and could put up attack buff with his skill 3. So then when I would draft him in concert with Landy, she's at 200 speed, GP would get the turn. Another thing that became very important with speed tuning was Fallen Cecilia, and that was because of the interaction between her and T-Time, where when T-Time uses her S3, any hero slower than Fallen Cecilia would have the shield removed and not immunity buff. So I wanted my Fallen Cecilia a bit faster than the rest of my team, so I put FCC at 230, knowing that my GP would be at 220 and then the DPS would be around 200. So paying attention to speed tuning was really important. Okay, so that's pretty much it when it comes to gear, and optimizing and stuff like that. Another big tip is if you're going to spend on the game, make sure you spend efficiently. There are a lot of different options in the shop that you can buy, and they are not all created equal by any stretch of the imagination. So one of the things in the shop that is the most valuable is the equipment packs and the Mola packs. If you can, get those, absolutely get them. They're the best bang for your buck. The only exception to that would be the special packs that come out for holidays. I think there's like a Christmas pack or something. There's usually like a summer pack. They come around, special events during the year. And they typically have a bunch of Molas, a bunch of Leafs, a bunch of Mystic Metals, etc. So those are the best bang for your buck. And then the regular packs that you're going to see on a regular basis are going to be the gear packs and the Mola packs. The Mola packs have become incredibly important because they were, buffed to increase the number of Molas they give, and that's kind of directly related to your hero roster. If you're pushing Legend, I would really encourage you to get the Mola packs every single month. I think that it's almost a necessity because it's going to allow you to build literally every single ML5 that they release, and then you're going to have Molas left over to build additional units. I'm almost at the point now where I don't even need to buy them, or at least I could maybe skip 1 month. Because pretty much everything is built. But if you're trying to catch up, the Mola packs are amazing. I guess Burning Passion packs are also really good value. Those are kind of like those special event packs though. So that's pretty much it for efficiently spending. If you are going to spend, that's how I would do it. Okay, so one other little tip, and this is more learning from my mistakes. Something I did in Season 2, and I really regret it. It's kind of embarrassing. I was switching up gear on some of my heroes like the day before the last day because I think there was a Hall of Trials and FCC was my tank that I used for that. I think the boss took extra damage when it was provoked, and my FCC doesn't really have effectiveness, so I swapped her ring to an effectiveness ring rather than like an HP ring. And so my FCC on the last day had like 21k HP, and I didn't even realize it until the day after. And that was pretty tragic because I distinctly remember like 4 or 5 matches where my FCC just got like deleted. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, like what is going on? People at this level have insane gear, because I was thinking in my head that she had like 27, 28k HP. Was not the case. She was on a crappy, like random like blue effectiveness ring to be able to do Holo Trials. So a generic tip, and this mostly applies to the last like week or 2 of the season, do not change your gear around. Get your units set and then just leave them there. So for example, Fighter Maya is a hero that I have been farming friendship on. And one of the things you do when you farm friendship is you put the little like event artifact that we got, this one here, because it increases the amount of friendship points they get. I'm trying to get her to friendship 10 so I can get my 3 molas back out of her. And so for the last couple weeks I've had her on this, and honestly probably for the last like month, because this takes absolutely forever to do. She's been on this artifact, but for the last like week of the season I did not put this artifact on her. I just left her on Elbrus, and I was like, I'm just not even gonna bother about farming friendship. I'm not gonna change my gear one bit. Once I had my units set the way I wanted them to for the final week, I wasn't swapping around artifacts. Another common one that gets swapped out would be like Spectre Tenebria, when I farm A13, I take book off of her and I give her Ayala Violin. I stopped doing that. I just set my units because I didn't want to basically forget to change them back, when I actually queued. So that's just a minor little tip. Another minor tip, and this is something I'm super guilty of, when I'm picking heroes, I'm just kind of scrolling around. I'm not really using the selector thing up here. I think it's way better to use this than to get in the habit of using it. I'm going to probably start to do that myself. But there were several games on the final day where I kind of panicked because I couldn't find the unit I was looking for. But if you, like for example, you're like, I want Rowana, Broccoli Soul Weaver, she's right there. So using this filter at the top is really important for the final day, or just in general, getting in the habit of using that. It may seem like a minor tip, you may do that already, but if you don't, do that when you're selecting units, get in the habit of doing it, and I think it'll give you more time to think about what picks you want to do rather than panic scrolling around like I do. And if you've seen me on stream, you've seen me panic scroll around. It's a bad habit that I need to break. So that's a small tip there. Another tip for climbing RTA is to create a little game diary. We have a really powerful tool now, and this didn't exist in the first season. I think they either added it after the second season or maybe in the preseason after the second season, or sometime in the third. I don't remember. We didn't always have this though. And that's the battle log. And this thing is amazingly important for learning how to draft and learning how to play, and also taking notes on your opponent. So it only holds like your last 10 games or so. And during, early in the season, it may not be super important, but about a month out, I would start screen capping every single game you play and keeping a log of it. That can help you identify opponents that you typically have problems against. It can help you remember units your opponents have that are built a particular way that's problematic for you. So for example, I just did it on a Discord and I just took notes on people. So if I lost or if I win, I would like write a few things down. So this was like way earlier in the season. I lost to this draft and I was trying to think, well, what can I do better? One thing, obviously, I wanted to note that Singelica was on ER. She had high ER, and she was pretty fast, and that she was on Potion Vial. I also wanted to note that Stenny was really high damage and that she wasn't tanky, and this is probably the more important note of these two, because sometimes people will open with this draft, and then they'll kind of switch to a Protect the One comp where, they take some Knights here or something, and then in those cases, Stenny might be tanky. But in this case, Stenny was squishy, so overwhelming it with damage would be an option. But maybe not for a squishier Stenny. And then his flurry was also on Bastion, was another thing that kind of threw me for a loop. I was expecting Spectre Tenebria to fall over to basically Arby and Tywin, but because of the Bastion, she was able to survive a lot longer than I thought she would. So that was one example. Let's see, is there another one? Oh, here's one, just like noting speed tuning on people. And you can figure that out by knowing your unit speeds and then looking about how their units are. And that'll affect the way you draft. If you think like, okay, Flitica's about 290, I know that I can just pick Acid, and then like he has to ban Acid. I think this Flitica was not on Guiding Light. I usually notice she's on Guiding Light here. I think my flurry was 285 at the time. So you can kind of see like the notes in the battle logs that people have and how you can do that. You can organize it however you want. I see a lot of people make like a little Excel spreadsheet. I chose just to do it on Discord, and then I could search for somebody's name here and pull them up if I had fought them, multiple times, and I could see what did they draft, before. That was really helpful on the final day. Another helpful thing on the final day was just being in a Discord call with guildmates for moral support. If you lost a couple in a row, they'd be there to cheer you up, and pull you back up and get you queuing again. So I would definitely recommend doing that. That kind of goes back to the first thing we talked about. So just to kind of quickly recap on everything, this went a little longer than I was planning. The first is mental. You kind of want to get that short-term, don't tilt attitude. Look at losses as an opportunity to learn. Long-term, never give up. If you fail to get High Champ or Legend one season, just try again next season, and just keep trying until you get your goal. Roster, understand that it's becoming more important than ever, and if you want to push High Legend or High Champion or Legend, you should probably be pulling all the ML5s. Gear, use your Skystones to farm, focus on Wyvern and A13, and then use the optimizer once you figured out your playstyle to gear your priority units first. And then if you're going to spend money, do it efficiently, get the gear packs and the mola packs, as well as the special packs. So that's pretty much it. If you have any tips that really helped you on your climb, I'd love to hear them in a comment below. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Later.